Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. Thank you for joining us. I am pleasantly joined by Kristie Perrotte of Thrive. Kristie and I have been fortunate enough to know each other now for it's a few years, right? We go back now. I think we can officially
six-ish
years. That's gone so quick. Like life is going too fast at the moment. And we're going to be tackling a topic that came from Midweek Madness. It was a question that was asked during one of my Midweek Madnesses around some of the differences between startup recruitment, marketing strategies versus large enterprise. Kristie, I'll let you introduce yourself because you've kind of spanned the sector. You know the ins and outs of this. Yeah, go and introduce yourself to everyone, and then I've got some questions for us to jump straight into.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And I love this subject because I did come from that large enterprise. Take a look at my LinkedIn. You'll see what my experience was, but it was running multi-million pound or multi-million dollar marketing budgets across geographies, etc. And the reality is it's not realistic. It's not realistic for 99% of the recruitment agencies out there. But I think there's still a lot of best practice in order to, especially if you're startup, but particularly if you're getting into that scale up stage, that, if you're starting up, purely starting up, there's so much you're going to be pulling from your own networks and your reputation and everything that has made you into a good recruiter. But as you scale up, that's when you start having to get a bit more sophisticated and start employing kind of more, strategic marketing techniques. I should say how I know this and why I've seen kind of the end to end of this. As I say, I was with a big enterprise 6 years ago. I started up a marketing agency called Thrive, which our whole ethos is looking at ROI and how marketing can be much more than pretty pictures and a bit of engagement on LinkedIn. Not saying that it doesn't have its place, but how do we actually drive that ROI and that kind of strategic, tangible results for it? So today I lead a team of 10. And we are working with the smallest business we work with has 2 people, and probably somewhere between 30 or 50 is our sweet spot. And we have some companies with several hundred staff. And it's about finding the right program for the right business.
Okay, so let's jump straight into it because just touching on what you're talking about there. So the obvious first question is, in terms of key differences between the two, right? If I'm working at Robert Half or I'm working at Matt's startup, what do you think the key differences are that exist? I think this is part of the question that was asked back on that Midweek Madness a few weeks back now, but what do you think the key differences are between the two?
I think you have to think about where your stage of growth is. And this is why I'm saying startup versus even scale up. And by scale up, I don't mean like multi-person scale up. I'm talking even like going from maybe 2 people to 10 people. You have to think about at the end of the day, recruitment businesses are there. Consultants are generally business development people, and they're there to fill roles, right? So there's a BD side, there's an actual recruiting side, and how do you scale this? Generally, when you're smaller businesses, they typically have been, like I say, it's founders or it's a few individuals who've come together that probably have a book of business already. They have established themselves. They know the best ways of working. They just want to do it for themselves. What happens when you start scaling, though, is I think especially in today's day and age, it's hard to find recruiter talent. So that model isn't scalable. So that whole personal branding to say, I'm not against it. I do it myself. There's a great place for it. But the likelihood that you're going to be able to attract all this talent that comes with a ready-made personal brand or ready-made audience or with a ready-made book of business is quite unrealistic. So at some point, you start investing in your business and that brand equity and that centralized marketing function to, not only deliver business opportunities to new hires you have on your team, but if you are trying to scale, depending on what your goals are in the business, you have to kind of create some equity in that to make it, if you are going for investment or future exit or multi-geography, there's only so far that your personal existing networks will take you. And that's where marketing has to come in and be the right emphasis at the right moments of your journey to support that.
Yeah, I love that. In terms of, I think we've both worked at different parts of like the industry and have worked with customers of all kinds. In terms of budget allocation and things like that, What have you seen from that? Because obviously you work with customers who have budgets. What are you seeing from that side of things in terms of what the allocation looks like, but also what the expectations maybe on return are? Because I know that between our customer base, like spending at the higher end is obviously an easier thing, but the value of return needs to be higher. So yeah, interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think this is where, going back to that startup mentality, this is when, whether you are doing your own personal branding or you're getting some social media support, if at the end of the day, if your main goal is to activate your existing network and let your existing network know that you exist, and obviously there's brand and there's value proposition, all these things that go into it on why they'd want to work with you, that's when you can get by with some social media support, whether that is an agency supporting you, probably 800 to £1,000 a month to get that quite regular drumbeat, whether it's your own personal account as well or your company account in that. I think as we scale, though, that's when you start having to look at, where am I putting my resource and where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck? So businesses that have an established database, and I know that's not necessarily startup, but it could be small businesses. I was talking to a business this morning. They've been operating for 24 years and they're a team of 8. So a business like that, they have these incredible networks. So personal branding is important for them, but they also have an incredible CRM off the back of that because they have 20 years of data going into that. So here's this incredible opportunity that you can be reactivating. There's a stat that's out there right now that, place candidates, and I've actually run similar, this backs up what I've seen. 70% of candidates you place, if you have any kind of tenure in your business, already exists in your CRM. So in an age of LinkedIn licenses going up and job, we're always, and even consultants' time to go and mine LinkedIn all the time. If you could do a better job of surfacing that in your CRM, the data has to exist. You may not have that but as you're scaling, even 3-4 years in business, you'd be surprised how much data, if you're using the CRM properly, is captured. Be reactivating that and repurposing it, and that's a much more economical strategy. You could put you could kind of sales sequences and nurture sequences for a couple £1,000. That really is your marketing 6 months worth that's constantly delivering business.
Yeah, 100%. Like I totally agree with that. One thing that, I remember Spencer Ogden did this infamously, where they turned off all their external marketing sources and just let people work in the CRM and and looked at the impact on placements, and it was kind of negligible. I think it actually went up, if I remember correctly. When that happened, I think there's this concept of I need to spend big, no matter what size of my business. I always think that that's where like smaller businesses have an advantage because they are more agile. They don't have the money. Every penny counts. Every dollar counts. And they are looking at kind of how they drive the most out of that, which I think is a really important thing to do.
What are some of the things you're seeing in that, Matt? Then there's the data element. How do you get the data? You say, where do they focus their energies to make the most of it? What's some of the examples you've seen that have been successful?
So I subscribe to a bit of a mantra when I work with customers, and I kind of pass it on, which is I think customers should always want to look bigger than they are. And I got like flamed for saying this a little while back, but I think if you're like one person, you want to look like 10. And I think if you're 10, you want to look like 100. And if you're 100, you want to look like 500. If you're 500, you want to look like 3,000, right? Like, I think that's kind of like a bit arbitrary, maybe the numbers, but I personally think that that's what people want to, should want to look like. And that's not being deceptive. I'm not saying lie when I say that, but when we work with a lot of customers, if we're working with smaller marketing teams, I think the big thing is how do we make this business look more established maybe than it might feel it is at this moment in time. And so we definitely have a lot of that coming through at the moment, where there's those like 20 to 25 head agency businesses that are like, hey, we want to now dominate this thing. And how do we go about doing that? And it's the strategy about like, how do we make people look like that? So we tend to do a lot of that. I think also the bigger strategy now is the that agility that smaller businesses have, I think, is problematic to the bigger businesses that are out there, because the smaller business only has to win in a small market to have a massive impact. It's like that law of small numbers. Like the small numbers for a small business can be big to them, right? Like same with us, right? Like deals to us matter more than they would to a huge business that's valued at billions, because of the nature of the return. So we can have an amazing month, which might be considered a terrible month, but everything is kind of relative. So we're seeing a lot of these smaller businesses adopt social media better, really focus on niche markets that are out there, and kind of really double down on those markets. And I think that that's given them the agility to compete heavily against the bigger players in the market. I mean, if you look at like Hays, 90% drop in profit. I think Rev was 15, wasn't it? You know, that tends to indicate that they maybe didn't adjust or haven't adjusted. And I don't know this. I don't work at Hays. If they want to speak to me, I'd be happy to take that call. But I think that generally speaking, like maybe they just aren't adapting as much as all of the other businesses, or a lot of the smaller businesses out there who are fighting for their lives, and it means so much more to them. So yeah, a lot of the business that we work with, they'll use social media more aggressively. They are willing to adopt different hiring techniques, maybe a bit more kitsch with the kind of hiring techniques. I'd say that the smaller businesses are fighting with that a lot more. Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that that more. So this one back at you. In terms of like effective strategies, I don't personally think there is one effective strategy, right? Like this never works like that. But like in terms of like small or large, like what are you kind of seeing? What type of stuff are you guys doing with your customers right now on that?
Well, I think the first question you have to ask yourself, because even though we're all in recruitment, you know, there's so many different niches, as you indicated. So the first question I always ask businesses I work with is, if you have 100% of your time and focus and emphasis you're going to be putting on the business, are you doing candidate attraction, client attraction, or consultant contraction? The 3 C's, or internal recruitment is the last one. And they can't be 33, 33, 33. I'm talking about like if you had a pie and you're carving up your time, what would be the ratio of time? It can't be 33, 33, 33, because we work in a supply and demand kind of industry. And it's not to say that a candidate can't become a client and back and forth. I get all that. But if you're working in month by month or quarter to quarter, you need to have something that's your driver. And it can switch, and we need to be nimble. And that's maybe part of your point to the bigger companies or struggle with it. But get those ratios. So right now, the majority of the businesses we're working with, they need lead generation. They need more clients, more leads. And the clients that they get, they need more exclusivity. And they need a higher fill rate ultimately. And that comes from a place of more exclusivity or more retained business. So they're off that hamster wheel of contingent. So whereas, and I'll say quickly, you know, in some industries, nursing, teaching, there's a few really obvious ones. The candidate is always king no matter what. So their programs will always be, if you get that candidate, you are most successful in that and retain that candidate. So that's the first question you have to ask yourself. What's your driver and where should you put your effort? And like I say, it's not all or nothing, but maybe it's 70% client and 20% candidate and maybe 10% internal recruitment, whatever it is. And it can constantly be changing for you. From there, now you have a bit of a roadmap. It starts you off on, okay, what is going to be our focus area? You heard it before. I always go to the CRM first. It's the first protocol. Yes, you need to have decent data, etc. But you have spent your money on these contacts at some point or another, whether it's a job board or a LinkedIn license or your recruiter's time. If you can surface it, this is the brilliance of automation tools right now. Even not even the really expensive ones. Even you could do this with MailChimp. It's a little bit more labor intensive, but you can do this.
Yeah.
Go to the contacts you already have. You know, look at. I do agree with you. We talked about LinkedIn and being aggressive on LinkedIn and getting that right brand message and leveraging those consultants' accounts. Yes, when you're smaller, that's going to be a bigger part of your strategy. You need a website, and you need a website that looks the part. You know, I like your analogy of if you're 5, whatever it was, if you're 5, you should look like 50 or whatever those numbers are. It kind of makes me think of that, you know, dress for the job you want, not the job you have today. It's kind of the same amount as that. But your website needs to look the part. And when you start out that website, it may be more of a brochure site. It may be, a chance that people are just, by brochure, I mean, it's like an online brochure. They go in and they see your value proposition, they see your USP, they see what you're all about. LinkedIn is not good enough, because while recruiters were on LinkedIn all day long, our clients aren't necessarily on it all day long. They're still using websites. Like, websites still needs to be really the foundation. I'm talking to the right person for this, aren't I, Matt? But the website needs to be the foundation of everything you're doing in marketing. But as you start to grow, that brochure site can start to become a performance vehicle. It becomes the machine. It becomes the machine that everything comes back to, and it's feeding those opportunities to the business. And that can be very pragmatic. You don't need a massive budget. I think you just need prioritization and a vision of what's the right level of support that aligns to that right stage of growth and needs of the business.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a dawning moment. I think I've seen that's happened with a lot of business owners who just don't believe that their website is the central point, or that they work, and then they get a big customer prospect come through it, and I saw something, Glenn Southern put something out on LinkedIn, and it was like one of his team, I think, had messaged him, like a WhatsApp to him, and it said like, oh, this customer has been waiting to hire and use us as their agency because they've seen all the content that we're putting out as an agency. And the minute that they've got sign off for agency, they've come straight to us with a great role. And I think in a business, that buy-in, when that buy-in happens and people realize that actually, we drive all this back, all our content comes back, all our social comes back, all our 30-second snippets come back to, and then people convert. Actually, that's a money-making tool then. And it's those companies that have embraced that have been embracing it for years, right? And I mean, even now, still, I do have people say, "Oh, like you just don't make money through websites and recruitment." And I was like, we've got customers making tens of millions a year of placements from website, 100% website related. I was talking to you before we got started here, and we've got customers doing 15 to 20,000 candidates a month through a website. There is a lot of money in that. They place, maybe it's the highest performing channel for them, and they might place, 5 to 8% of those people that come through. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of money that they're driving. So it's just that they've submitted to that idea that it's going to work, and then they've made it work around it. And I think that's kind of that's key. But they're a big business. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on if we were starting up now, if we're a smaller business, what approach would you take to brand building? As opposed to the bigger companies, their brand building approach is going to be so fast, right? They're going to have budgets, there's TV, there's a lot of that kind of media, which we've probably both been involved in. But in terms of like, if we start up a recruitment agency now, what are we doing from a brand building perspective, do you think, to start to compete against that?
Yeah. Obviously, I said it before, obviously the personal branding has to be one of the first things. It has to be. 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, people are starting up a business because they've been very successful as a recruiter elsewhere. So they have that network and they bring that across. You'd be foolish not to, to capitalize on that. But within that, I think we have to change the narrative on personal branding as just like wanting to be seen out there, because it's wanting to be seen for the right things. I think there's a lot of FOMO out there. Oh gosh, they got so many likes, they got so many this and that. But and I'm not dissing the dog pictures or the Ibiza pics. I'm not trying to make it, big, don't do it. But don't get wrapped up in your competitors that are all doing this, because it doesn't necessarily mean it's translating into tangible business. Those likes and shares do not mean that it's part of the business. I saw, not to digress too much, but I saw somebody recently on one of the WhatsApp chats. It's not even recent. It was a few months back, and it really stuck with me. That she was saying, oh, I'm a DEI expert, and I've done all this content. I've been doing it for so long, and I've done it all wrong. I've now learned the recipe for success, and I need to be doing all these things, and I need to change my whole plan. And I'm like, no, don't do that, because at the end of the day, yes, in our little kind of recruitment bubble, we have this kind of influencer world, and everybody's liking and engaging. But at the end of the day, your core customer is probably has a different behavior on LinkedIn. If you're dealing with CFOs, Their behavior is very, very different. If you're working in construction, you probably won't even be on LinkedIn. You may be, you know, on Facebook or Instagram. But you have to literally put yourself in those shoes of your target customer and just block out the noise, block out the FOMO noise of you have to be doing everything. So that brings you back to, if you know your market, if you give the right insights, if you're branding it properly, and the keywords of note as well. If I'm a finance recruiter and I'm talking about finance recruitment trends, the algorithm's picking that up and it's showing it to my finance community more likely. They may not be the ones who are trigger happy on liking and sharing, but there's a silent scroller community out there that is really poignant, you know, that really has massive potential. So that's number one. Number two, depending on what kind of recruitment business you're doing, I mean, I'm all about kind of the mushrooming of engagement. So again, it differs on what kind of your sector specialism is. But if you do have a client in a business, how can you mushroom that across different hiring managers? That is an obvious one. The other obvious of that is if you're going into new territories. So I know it's not quite startup, but say if I'm starting up in the US, I look at my companies that I have great relationships with here that have a US arm, and I'd be looking at targeting specifically those, and it could be US, it could be Germany, it could be wherever, but I would be targeting those companies specifically where I already have relationships and great case studies and great messages.
Yeah, that land and expand, we call it that. It's the cheapest way to win new business, right? When you've already won business, to get more business from that customer. You know, you don't want to ever lose customers, but people often don't think about how they're going to expand that customer base. And I think smaller businesses, that is a huge win, where they can get a good account, where they can start to crack that account, do a great job. They can over service it. They can absolutely service it more than a big account, like because it means so much to them. Back to that, like, law of small numbers. But then if they can expand that into a different territory and then start to do US, all of a sudden they've got one customer, but it might feel like 3, 4, or 5 customers to that one business. And I think that's where they'll win.
We're in such a great place as an industry. You know, there's so many industries out there. There's literally, one company, one buyer, and they buy something, once every 5 years. You're constantly having to renew and get net new. Our industry, anybody who's watching this knows, you could have one customer and they could be fueling, and you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. That's another kind of, you want to diversify your portfolio as well. But the potential you can create from something like you just said, that can be very, very small. That's a much better strategy than just going in. I hear so many businesses, particularly on the US side, we're going to stateside. And I say, what states? Well, all of them. And it's like, do you know how big that market is? You would be better off just focusing on Massachusetts than focusing on the whole thing. I think it is. I do think it's because it has shifted from, the rise of digital, the rise of online tools, the rise of buyer behaviors, and how there's more agencies. Buyers aren't waiting for your phone call every day. They have options. All of this has created this massive shift to the industry. I mean, I'm not telling anything new that people don't know this, except there's a lot of mindset still that consultant should be the front end marketing supporting it. That consultant should just go to the US and just go attack the whole US and make it happen. Well, it's not that simple. That's not how our industry is built anymore. It is that marketing foundation that you cannot target the whole of the US in a proper strategic marketing plan. But when you get marketing and sales working together and actually, leaning on each other with these right questions, saying, okay, what is our go-to-market strategy? Where are we going to find business? That's when the magic happens. Because, egos have to be parked at the door. That BD person, that consultant needs to say, okay, this is our business strategy. And that marketer needs to say, okay, here's how we're actually going to reach that segment versus the entire of the United States.
Yeah, I love that. And I totally agree with it. I mean, having lived there and worked there, it's the thing that struck me and it has always stayed with me. It's a big market, but it's fundamentally, it's such a big country. Like, physically, it's so big, right? And I know that might sound like people might be like, well, yeah, of course it is. But like, just getting from place to place is flights. You are not driving. I mean, people do, right? But as a Brit over there, like a 3-hour drive in the UK is like a long way. 3 hours, like the next city in some states, right? And you'll drive for like 10 hours and not touch the end of your state. So yeah, like that hyper focused approach. And I think if you're a smaller business, you can do that though. You can go, right, it matters a lot to us if we work Boston and a couple of surrounding cities. That can be like working half of the UK, right? It can give you that type of return from it. I was listening to a podcast recently, and somebody was saying like they were working with somebody in real estate, a sales rep in real estate, and they said, right, you've got like I think they had the whole of the north east to go after, right? And they hit their quota, right? And then they said, oh, next year we changed the strategy. And then they only had New York. And they're like, well, you've just eliminated so much of the United States for me. And they hit the quota. Same quota. Hit the quota.
Of course.
The next year, they said, actually, you're going to get these blocks within New York. And they're like, this is impossible. Like, and they hit the quota. And then they gave them one building the next year and they hit the quota. And I think that for me, that is the story of enterprise versus startup. Startups can work one building and hit their target for it, and it will work just as well as this yellow. We call it yellow pages, and open the yellow pages, pick somebody, phone them. Hey, have you got any jobs on at the moment in recruitment?
Yeah.
Like, you're like,
well,
we don't have to do that.
That's what it was. That's what it was 25 years ago. And you could reach somebody on the other end of the phone, which you can now. And two, you just had less competition, and people were ready to take your call. You know, they're not now. Our lives are so much busier. You know, there's another point on that. You're talking about the Brit in America. I'm the Canadian in the UK, 14 years on. But going back, I remember, so with the big employer I was with, there was like the number one rookie of the year, who was a London-based rookie. He came over to our office in Vancouver. And, you know, people loved his accent. And, you know, a lot of clients, you know, bought into that. But he was really aggressive. Like, you know, he came in, and I don't feel it's aggressive now. It was just the London way of selling. He sold like a London recruiter, and it flopped. It flopped in that market. Once they got over the accent, it didn't work. And I remember I went back. I'd been over in the UK for several years, and I went back and I sat on the sales floor. I think I was working out my visa or something. So I was back in the Vancouver office, you know, while my visa was being sorted. And I was listening to the conversations, having been out of this pool for a while. I was listening to the Vancouver conversations, and, you know, they're talking about their kids, and they're talking about, it was such a different sales style. And now let's adopt that to the US and what we're saying. You know, how you're selling to somebody in South Carolina is going to be very different to how you're selling to somebody in Manhattan. You know, how you do business in Texas is going to be very different to somewhere else. Somebody told me recently, forget what company, but it was Florida. You know, you don't talk price until you've done 5 or 6 meetings, and you've gone to the baseball with them, and you've done this and you've done that. Yeah. So I think as much as it's as much about targeting the US for your services and where the demand is and where the opportunity lies, as it also is what's our style, what is our brand in its very core, and does it align with the business or the geographies or business I'm trying to go after.
I love that so much. So in terms of, so if we got limited resources though.
Yeah.
Like what kind of content, messaging and things like that, what would you advise to those businesses? Because when I say limited resources, I'm probably talking sub 100 heads actually in the UK market. Anyway, I think sub 100 heads in the UK market as an agency is probably 1 in marketing, maybe 2. Whereas if I look at our bigger customers here, we might have 20, 30 in marketing. So like what content should we be maybe thinking about? I don't know, what content, or you know, how are we going to use our resources to compete against some of those bigger brands?
Okay, great. So when I thought you were saying small, I thought you meant like 5 people. So
no, I meant that originally, but I was thinking
30, 50, 100. Yeah.
That is still probably small, right?
It is probably still small. I mean, I am always a stickler. I said it already, to database marketing. But database marketing is not sending newsletters. It is not just like, let's throw everything in this really crazy long message and just send it to everybody and splatter them with this.
Yeah.
I believe in hypersegmentation. Hypersegmentation, you know, understanding your, you know, it's so much more than the title, the company size, the geography, the department. It's actually, you know, kind of start cross-referencing that with some of stuff like, did they get investment? What stage of the cycle are they doing? Hiring, or obviously hiring or redundancies, but start kind of creating this more complex, but just more personalized. You know, personalized, not just like, hey, hi Tom, I did it. That's not personalization. Personalization is really understanding their pain points. And yes, it might mean that you're creating multiple versions of these emails. And I understand that takes resource. But when you hit that hyper personalization, that they feel that you're actually speaking to them in exactly their pain points, your conversion rate on that is going to be that much more successful than something that you just put in once and put it out to everyone. So that would be my advice. Like you can, like I said before, email marketing and database marketing, it is the cheapest marketing you'll ever do. It's the cheapest lead you'll ever get. Lead being a hiring intent of some sort, a marketing qualified lead. If it's a client, a candidate who might have surfaced themselves as being, they weren't active, but they might surface themselves as that. You will never get that more cheaply than through database marketing. You cannot hire a consultant doing personal resourcing and time. You cannot get it for that. You cannot pay for advertising cheaper than that. You cannot, maybe your personal brand and some of your organic will create this over time, but you can't track it the same way to actually have the exact correlation of this drove that. So database and email marketing is 100% my go-to, is my number one, and it is cheap and easy, but you just need to have a bit of insight behind it, and it needs to be more than just e-shots. You know, e-shots, spray and pray, is not only, the problem with it is people think it works. You know, consultants will put together their email, their spray and pray email, they send it out to 10,000 people. One person responds, gives them a job order. Like, this is it, it worked. It was an amazing strategy. But meanwhile, you've just killed your domain. You know, you're going to be blacklisted everywhere. How many people have you pissed off in the meantime? Because the other 9,900 people are, you know, they're like, why have you messaged me? But that consultant thinks it's worked because they got one job order out. And that is not sustainable, you know, and it's certainly not scalable. So how can you do this more cleverly? Maybe you are sending less, but it's better quality, and you get a better, and the truth is in the data at the end of the day. You know, it has to be touch and feel it. They have to get the job order off of it. Totally get that. But the metrics need to also tell the right story, that you've done the right things to get to those job orders. Yeah,
I love that. And what, you know, I know you've spoken about this for years now. This is not like a new thing for anyone that's ever heard you speak before, but your correlation between the role that data plays in shaping marketing decisions applies for small and large businesses. I've always thought like it's the same thing, right? And I do think there's way more synergies than we might. I hate saying synergies. I always feel like I'm on The Apprentice when I say that. There's way more synergies though between small and larger businesses than probably people ever realize in our industry anyway. And actually just using and applying data and analyzing that data to segment and to target is like a number one thing for me. Whether you're a big business or a little business, you should be using your data for the same purpose, which is to drive cheaper returns. You are right. Database marketing or CRM marketing is the cheapest media right now that is out there in this space. Like, there is no cheaper media right now than that. I sell a product and it is cheaper than my product to do that. That is just a fact of life. Actually being able to reignite that database. Now, it might not be the biggest return because there might be other things that we could do to get bigger job ads or more jobs and things like that. That might be the case. But in terms of the cheapest way of actually making placements, you will have a lot of people in your database already that you can place, especially if you've been going probably, I don't know, like arbitrarily, but like 2 to 5 years. You'll have had so much data in that 2 to 5 year period that the next placement is probably in your database, especially if you're a niche recruiter, which most small businesses are.
Especially if you're working in kind of that middle space. Yes, I understand executive search. It is a different model, and yes, it has to be so pinpointed. I arguably say that this is where the networks really come into play. They may not be in the database, but they're probably in the network. But in the large, the majority of recruitment that's out there, there's more than one person who can do that job. You can't say that there's one person in the entire UK or entire world, for that matter, that can do that one job. It's not true. There's going to be multiple people who can be potentially put forward. So a candidate that will fit that job probably exists in your database. You just have to be able to surface it. And unfortunately, data is often the blocker on that for a lot of companies.
In any city at any one time, there's probably, I don't know how many interviews are going on at any one time, but if we say like this interview process, it's a weird industry, that we pretty much have only one person usually gets the job, right? Usually. Okay, there might be, we love both, right? We've all got that story. But the reality is that there is a number 2, and that number 2 came so close, and number 3 might have come so close. And that's just one job in a city. There's then there's 20 recruiters, 20 companies hiring potentially for the same type of role. So there could be another 60 to 80 people at any one moment in time in any city in the UK that were perfect for each other's jobs.
Exactly.
So those candidates exist, right?
Exactly. And I think also with this is how we can also shift perceptions of the industry. I think this whole kind of, there's a wall with AI and automation, and oh, they're taking our jobs, or it's so impersonal and this and that. But I actually argue, I think it can make recruitment more personal, because candidates, and your example right there, they were amazing. It's not saying that they're not awesome, but until that recruiter has a similar job for them again, they don't hear from them for another, years. And this is where the industry has such a bad reputation. That it's like, oh, those recruiters, I didn't hear from them. And you got to defend the recruiter at the end of the day. Who's paying them? They're busy. They can't. They get 500 CVs. They can't answer everyone back. We all get why that is not feasible. But for that, we're talking about their jobs and their livelihoods. Like, this is personal. It's personal to them. So if you've had a way that you could communicate at scale, and it's not just sales messages or that to them, and it's not just, hey, I have a job to them, but you're actually being able to, and it works the same for client too, but on the candidate as the example, if you're kind of curating and creating these talent pools of engaged contacts, I think it's a tall order to change the entire reputation of the industry off of one recruiter. That's a bit of a tall order. But, you could just imagine the reputation of your business that you will be building out of this, that you really become quite standout because you're human. You're human, but automation and technology is actually what facilitated you being more human to that candidate.
I was talking on a panel at an event, and actually I realized that I might have been left behind in life for the first time. I felt human for the first time, other than when like your child like mocks you or something like that. But I was talking about buying holidays, and I was like, we were talking about larger purchases and using like automation to do that. And I was like, no, like I get it at like the tills at it was Martin Redstone. He buried me. It was one of the worst moments of my life. But we were talking about Tesco. He's like, how many people go to the personal versus go to the self-serve? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, no, but like £25 worth of groceries doesn't compare to a £6,000 to £10,000 holiday. And he goes, okay, like show of hands, who in the room but goes into a travel agent to buy the holiday versus who goes online? I was the only person that goes into a travel agent, and there was over 50 people in the room. And I was like,
wait, what? A tech company.
And I found a tech company. And I was like, what? And I was like, but you go into the Virgin store, right? I'm going on holiday soon. And you go into the Virgin store, and they've got the seats on the plane, and they'll give you drinks, and you get a good discount because you can negotiate in person on it. And I was like, oh, and then I realized actually maybe that people are just happy with a lot of that automation. But I think then there are going to be people who love the personal touch, and that is what's going to separate it out. And I still personally think that the human touch is better than the tech touch, but the tech touch can enable space for the human touch to happen by freeing time up. And I think that's
precisely it.
where I'm sitting also. I've got a final question for you. And we've talked a lot here about how the small guys compete against the big guys. And I was thinking, I was like, okay, how do large enterprises compete against smaller businesses?
That's a great question.
Because they've got to remain, because smaller businesses are agile, right? We have competitors now that work for big businesses and they can't compete, right? They can't keep up. They can compete, that's unfair, but they would struggle to keep up because my rates of everything are faster because we get up every day and we're doing it and we're energized and we love doing what we're doing. But how do the big enterprises stay competitive against smaller, more nimble companies?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I have a sort of answer to it, and it's only because I heard
you start.
So I think that the big advantage that bigger businesses have is something you already spoke about, which is personal brand. I think they can exponentially increase their marketing team by enrolling every sales rep in that business as a marketer, right? Who's pushing content out and is pushing it into very specific markets, either niche markets or a location-based, like a geo-based strategy. I just don't think that gets leveraged anywhere near enough. I think recruiters, sales, I call everyone sales, but like recruiters, I think are not going to use the word lazy, but reticent to post content on LinkedIn that is general content because they might feel they don't have the time, or they feel like it's not going to be good, or they've got nothing to talk about. And marketing don't control that for them, particularly in a lot of businesses.
The risks are higher, though. This is what you're going to run into.
Yeah.
The risk is too high. So, a year ago, I remember being at Rec Expo, and everybody's talking about Chat GPT and this and that. And I actually, was speaking to a couple larger agencies. One actually was an IT director, and one was like an HR director. No, legal. One was legal, and one was IT. And they were freaked out about this, and everything was about like, how do we lock it down? How do we lock it down? We can't let our recruiters to have it. Which a lot has evolved in a year. But having been in that environment, I actually do get it. Stuff like GDPR, stuff like your reputation. You fly under the radar when you're small. When you're a big business, the risks go up and up and up, and what it actually means on fines, on it's harder. So I don't know. I think that's a hard one. I don't know if the personal brand, because I also go back to the fact that you don't hire recruiters just because they're personal brand. We're not in a business that we're just hiring influencers like that, or we shouldn't be. That's the first way to commoditize our industry, is just doing that. You need to hire recruiters who are good recruiters, for different elements, possibly, and they are for different reasons. I think, though, I actually, believe it or not, I think to answer it, and I'm sorry, I've just kind of squashed that answer with the.
No, it's absolutely fine.
Element. But I again think that this is where automation and possibly AI done well is where they're going to be able to do it. Because I think they still need to hyper niche themselves. I think that's one of the big problems. Like you'll see like these big companies, like Hayes, they'll have an IT division, they'll have a finance division. IT division means nothing. The competitors are like niche. That if you could set up niche desks, problem is you can't get the marketing to be that you can't have a big enough marketing team to service all those niches. So that's going back to where AI and automation could, particularly AI, can personalize and make bespoke content for all of those verticals. And that's my opinion, where they can do it is they need to take a big company and go hyper niche off of it.
Yeah, I would argue that structurally those businesses are not set up right. You just generally, they're too top down and they're not bottom up enough as businesses in terms of where it comes from. I think if you look at a lot of those businesses, like one thing I found, and I'm not great at working in a big business. I'm the first person to admit that. But I think the reason is that I'm used to trying to make everybody an entrepreneur in the businesses that I run, and empower people to try and be an entrepreneur and be like me, or like not like me, it's a bit big-headed, but like think like me and protect the money like it's mine and make money like it's like, if everyone thinks like that, I always think businesses are really moves it forward quite quickly. I think when you work for a bigger business, you kind of maybe feel, oh, there's a safety net. Like, hey, you know, I'm sure there's consultants at Hayes that that I think, I'm not picking on Hayes here, but obviously they've just put that report out. And I think people are probably thinking, oh, I work for Hayes. What? It's never going to go wrong, right? Like, it's never going to go wrong. And you think, well, it can, if that's the mentality that we have across the business. Actually, I remember speaking to Janine Owen about this a while back and talking about every recruiter understanding the cost of their desk, not just the cost of their salary, but like how much does it cost to physically employ you, pay your tax and NI, pay for your CRM software, for the website as a percent, every little bit of everything, and all your job board spend, your candidate costs. You know, because if that's 70,000 or 80,000 and you've got a recruiter on 35,000, well, they're like, well, I need to make double my salary just before I break even. And then I'm going to have to make profits on top of that to understand. And I think that's what I would do. I would empower every team, every division, every geo as its own business unit. And I would bring marketing and align that into like many, many, many small businesses. And compete with small businesses like we were a small business. And then I would incentivize the business units on that. So if you're in a smaller market, actually maybe your incentives are higher, maybe your targets are different because the geo that you operate in is a bit different. But if you could overperform, you might be able to kill the competition in a market and we become bigger. So I'd say that they probably have lost the entrepreneurial edge that made them a big business in the first place, or that got them to that. And they might need to consider structurally changing what it would mean. I remember hearing Adecco talk at an event I was at, and Joyce Russell, who was the CEO of Adecco, was saying at the time that they'd moved out of big offices and started putting consultants into WeWorks because that's where their clients were starting to pitch up. And it was like, we don't want people in their own silo. We wanted them in co-working spaces where they could potentially work. I think that's the entrepreneurial nature of it that would probably start to compete. I don't know what that means for recruitment marketers in particular, but I think that it's just the alignment better of recruitment marketing with like niches and geo niches potentially, like how that works and what that looks like. I'd probably say is somewhere close. Cool.
We could keep going.
I could go just today, and you could speak to you forever. Look, it has been a total pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on to another From the Source. It's been an absolute pleasure. What's the best way for people to contact you and get in touch with you?
Well, my name is very unique. I hope it's going to be tagged in here, and you could contact me on LinkedIn. As I say, there's only one of me in the whole world. So find me and we can talk.
There is about 5 of me in the world. And I happen to know like 3 of them. It's really weird. But yeah, okay. So LinkedIn, website, I'll link everything here in the description to everything as well. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. We could have done this all day and carried on going here, I'm sure. But yeah, until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. We've got a lot more content coming up. So yeah, subscribe, stay tuned, and yeah, until then, until next time.
Bye. Thanks, Matt.